Ladies and gentlemen, let me ask you something real right out the gate. What happens when the talking stops? Not the peaceful kind of quiet, not the comfortable silence, but that silence, the one where both of you pull back. No calls, no texts, no explanations, just space so loud it echoes in your chest. Most people think silence means the end. They think silence means somebody stopped caring. But I'm here to tell you today that kind of silence is not empty. It is active. It is powerful. And if you understand what's happening, it can change everything. When you both go silent, the first thing that happens is the noise dies, the arguing stops, the defending stops, the chasing stops. And when the noise is gone, something uncomfortable shows up: truth. See, when words are flying, emotions are hiding, but silence strips everything bare. There's no distraction, no performance, no ego speeches. Just thoughts, memories, and unanswered questions sitting alone in the dark. That's when the mind starts working overtime. Silence reveals the truth because when words disappear, masks fall off. Conversation is often a place where people hide, perform, defend, manipulate, or distract. Talking can be used to control outcomes, soften consequences, or delay accountability. Silence removes all of that. When two people stop speaking, there is no longer a script to follow, no immediate feedback to lean on, no reassurance to numb the discomfort. What remains is the mind alone with its own thoughts, and that is where truth begins to surface. In silence, people can no longer explain themselves out of guilt or talk their way around responsibility. They are left with memories, emotions, and unanswered questions that force honest self-examination. When the noise stops, the brain starts replaying moments that were ignored while everything was loud. Silence brings back the tone of your voice, the way you showed care, the consistency you brought into the connection. It reminds someone of what they felt when you were present, not just what they said when emotions were high. Words can be twisted, but absence cannot be argued with. Silence creates contrast, and contrast creates awareness. Only when something is gone do people realize the role it played in their life. Silence also removes the emotional tug of war. There is no arguing, no persuading, no trying to be understood. Without those exchanges, a person must face the reality of their choices. They begin to see patterns instead of isolated incidents. They recognize how often they took without giving, expected without appreciating, assumed without protecting. Silence becomes a mirror that reflects behavior honestly, without excuses, and mirrors are uncomfortable because they do not lie. In that quiet space, intentions rise to the surface. If someone genuinely cares, the silence will disturb them. It will feel heavy. They will feel the loss of connection, the lack of warmth, the missing energy. Silence becomes an emotional vacuum that pulls thoughts inward. They will wonder if they mishandled something valuable, if pride cost them something meaningful, if they underestimated the depth of your absence. Care does not disappear just because communication stops. In fact, silence amplifies it. On the other hand, if someone does not truly value the connection, silence feels easy. There is no restlessness, no reflection, no internal questioning, and that is truth as well. Silence does not create false answers. It exposes real ones. It shows who is capable of sitting with discomfort for the sake of growth and who is comfortable walking away without looking back. Words can promise effort, but silence proves priorities. Silence also strips away emotional dependency. When communication ends, there is no immediate validation, no external emotional regulation. Each person is forced to manage their own feelings. This is where emotional maturity becomes clear. Some people use silence to grow, to think, to understand. Others use it to escape, distract, or replace. The difference between those reactions reveals character more accurately than any conversation ever could. Another truth silence reveals is how much of the connection was built on habit rather than intention. Constant communication can become routine, something people rely on without consciously valuing. Silence breaks that routine. It forces the question, do I miss this person, or do I miss the comfort they provided? Do I miss who they are, or do I miss how they made life easier? These questions cannot be answered honestly while messages are still flowing. Silence is what separates attachment from appreciation. Silence also exposes emotional investment levels. When both people stop reaching out, time becomes a test. Days feel longer when emotions are involved. Thoughts wander more often to what was said, what was unsaid, what could have been done differently. If someone is emotionally invested, they will feel the weight of unresolved silence. If they are not, time passes with little impact. This difference becomes painfully clear, but clarity, even when painful, is still a form of truth. For the person who chooses silence intentionally, it becomes a tool for self-respect. Silence stops the cycle of over-explaining and over-giving. It removes the temptation to convince someone of your worth. In doing so, it reveals a deeper truth about the self, that your value does not need constant verbal confirmation. Silence reconnects you with your inner stability. It reminds you that peace is louder than chaos and dignity speaks without words. Silence also reveals how people handle uncertainty. Some individuals rush to fill the gap, unable to tolerate not knowing where they stand. Others can sit with uncertainty and reflect. The way someone responds to silence shows their relationship with control. Those who need control fear silence because it cannot be managed. Those who are secure use silence to gain understanding. This difference is fundamental and often hidden during constant communication. In silence, emotional responsibility becomes unavoidable. There is no immediate response to lean on, no reassurance to quiet anxiety. People must confront their own feelings instead of projecting them outward. This is where truth sharpens. Feelings that were once blamed on circumstances or on the other person are now clearly internal. Silence removes the illusion that someone else is responsible for your emotional state. Silence also highlights boundaries. When communication stops, it shows who respects space and who tries to violate it. It reveals who understands timing and who demands access. Respect is often louder in silence than affection is in conversation. Someone who values you will not rush to cross boundaries just to soothe their discomfort. They will reflect before reacting, and that reflection speaks volumes. Over time, silence clarifies whether a connection was built on emotional depth or emotional convenience. Convenience fades quickly when effort is required. Depth lingers, even in quiet. Silence does not kill real connections, it tests them. It exposes whether the bond was strong enough to survive without constant reinforcement. What remains after silence is what was real all along. Silence also removes fantasy. When communication continues, it is easy to imagine potential, to project hope onto words. Silence grounds everything in reality. There is no imagined tone, no hopeful interpretation of delayed replies, no emotional bargaining. Reality becomes plain. Either action follows silence, or it does not. Either reflection leads to growth, or it leads to distance. Both outcomes reveal truth without ambiguity. In that quiet, uncomfortable space, people learn whether they are missed or merely noticed. Being noticed is easy. Being missed requires emotional impact. Silence shows the difference. It reveals whether your presence was essential or just familiar, and that realization, though sometimes painful, is powerful because it ends confusion. Silence does not speak in sentences, but it communicates clearly. It shows who feels the absence, who reflects on it, who acts because of it, and who moves on untouched. It answers questions that conversations keep unresolved. It reveals value, intention, maturity, and truth without raising its voice, without defending itself, without asking to be understood, leaving nothing but honesty sitting alone in the quiet. Silence shifts the power back to you because it removes you from the position of emotional pursuit and places you back into the position of self-command. When you stop reacting, stop explaining, and stop chasing understanding from someone who is uncertain, the dynamic changes immediately. Power has never belonged to the loudest person in the room. It belongs to the one who can remain grounded when emotions are pulling in every direction. Silence is not withdrawal out of fear, it is withdrawal out of clarity. It is the moment you decide that your peace matters more than winning an argument or being validated in the moment. When communication continues during emotional imbalance, one person often becomes the emotional provider while the other becomes the emotional receiver. The one who talks more, explains more, and reaches out more slowly gives away leverage. Silence interrupts that pattern. It stops the cycle where you are trying to be understood by someone who is not listening. In that stillness, you are no longer negotiating your worth. You are no longer performing emotional labor to keep a connection alive. You are simply standing still, and standing still is often the strongest position a person can take. Silence forces emotional independence. Without immediate feedback, without responses to lean on, you are required to regulate your own emotions. At first, this feels uncomfortable. The urge to reach out, clarify, or fix things arises because the mind wants relief. But when you resist that urge, something powerful happens. You discover that you can survive uncertainty. You learn that anxiety does not control you. You begin to trust yourself instead of outsourcing emotional stability to someone else. This inner shift is where power truly returns. As silence continues, your nervous system begins to calm. The emotional spikes caused by waiting for replies, analyzing tone, and overthinking words slowly fade. With that calm comes perspective. You start seeing the situation clearly instead of emotionally. You recognize patterns that were invisible when you were constantly engaged. You see where you were overgiving, over-explaining, or tolerating behavior that did not align with your standards. Silence clears the emotional fog and replaces it with discernment. Power also returns because silence restores dignity. Dignity is lost when a person repeatedly reaches out to someone who is unsure, dismissive, or inconsistent. Every unanswered message, every delayed reply chips away at self-respect. Silence stops that erosion. It is a boundary that says you will not beg for attention or chase clarity from someone unwilling to offer it freely. In choosing silence, you choose self-respect, and self-respect changes how you see yourself. When you reclaim your dignity, you also reclaim your time and energy. Instead of pouring emotional effort into someone else's confusion, you reconnect with routines, passions, and goals that may have been neglected. Your life begins to expand again. This expansion is not loud or dramatic, but it is deeply grounding. As your focus shifts back to your own growth, the imbalance that once existed naturally corrects itself. Silence also removes you from emotional manipulation. Words can be used to confuse, deflect, or delay accountability. Silence cannot be argued with. When you stop engaging, you no longer participate in cycles of mixed signals or half answers. You are no longer available for emotional tug of war. This refusal to engage on unstable terms places you back in control of your emotional boundaries. Another way silence shifts power is by changing perception. When you are always available, your presence becomes predictable. Predictability reduces perceived value. Silence introduces absence, and absence invites reflection. Without you constantly showing up, the other person is left to confront the reality of your missing presence. This is not manipulation, it is consequence. Your silence allows your value to be felt rather than explained. Silence also strengthens your internal authority. You stop looking outside yourself for permission to feel okay. You stop measuring your worth by someone else's response. Instead, you begin to trust your own judgment. This internal authority is subtle but transformative. It changes how you carry yourself, how you speak, and how you decide. Even if nothing externally changes, something internally becomes unshakable. As your sense of self stabilizes, you become less reactive. Emotional triggers lose their power over you. You no longer feel compelled to respond immediately or defend yourself unnecessarily. This calm confidence is a form of power that cannot be forced or faked. It comes from knowing that you are whole regardless of how someone else behaves. Silence also tests your boundaries, and passing that test strengthens them. Every moment you choose not to break the silence out of fear or loneliness reinforces your self-discipline. You prove to yourself that you can honor your own needs even when it feels difficult. This self-trust becomes a foundation for future decisions, ensuring that you no longer abandon yourself to maintain connection. Power returns because silence redefines the relationship dynamic. Instead of reacting to someone else's pace or mood, you establish your own rhythm. You move from emotional dependency to emotional autonomy. This shift changes how others interact with you, whether consciously or unconsciously. People respond differently to someone who is centered rather than chasing. Silence also protects your emotional integrity. When emotions are high, words spoken in haste can cause regret. Silence prevents damage that cannot be undone. It gives you time to process before responding, if responding is even necessary. In this way, silence is not avoidance, it is strategic patience. Over time, silence rebuilds self-worth. Not the fragile kind that depends on praise, but the solid kind rooted in self-knowledge. You remember who you were before the confusion, before the emotional imbalance. You reconnect with your standards and expectations. This reconnection shifts how you show up in all relationships, not just one. Silence also teaches you that closure does not always come from conversation. Sometimes closure comes from acceptance, from realizing that you do not need every answer to move forward. This realization is empowering because it frees you from waiting on someone else to validate your experience. As silence continues, your emotional center of gravity moves inward. You stop orbiting around someone else's decisions. You become the reference point of your own life. This is where true power resides, not in controlling others, but in mastering yourself. Silence does not guarantee a specific outcome with another person, but it guarantees a specific outcome within you. It restores balance, clarity, dignity, and control. It reminds you that your presence is a choice, not an obligation. It allows you to stand firmly in who you are without needing to announce it, explain it, or defend it, holding your ground quietly, confidently, and fully in command of your own emotional space. Silence determines the outcome because when communication stops, illusion collapses and reality takes over. There is no longer a space to pretend, to postpone decisions, or to live in emotional ambiguity. Silence demands an answer, not in words but in direction. When both people go quiet, the connection is placed under a microscope, and what happens next is not accidental. It is the natural result of emotional maturity, intention, and capacity. Silence becomes a crossroads where the relationship either evolves into something healthier or ends because it cannot sustain itself without confusion. In silence, growth begins for those who are capable of it. Growth does not come from comfort, it comes from discomfort. When the familiar rhythm of communication is removed, a person who is emotionally mature begins to reflect. They examine their behavior, their patterns, and their choices. They start asking hard questions instead of avoiding them. Did I listen enough? Did I show appreciation? Did I protect what mattered? Silence creates the space where accountability can exist without defensiveness. If someone truly values the connection, silence does not push them away. It pushes them inward towards self-awareness. When growth happens, silence becomes preparation rather than punishment. It allows emotions to settle so that future conversations are not driven by ego or fear. It creates room for humility, where someone can approach with clarity instead of chaos. This is how silence leads to a stronger reconnection, not because someone was chased or pressured, but because they chose to return with intention. Growth changes the quality of what comes next. The conversation that follows silence is different. It is slower, more thoughtful, and more respectful. It is no longer about winning or proving, but about understanding and alignment. However, silence also exposes limitations. Not everyone grows in quiet. Some people avoid reflection entirely. For them, silence is not a mirror but an escape route. Instead of sitting with discomfort, they distract themselves. They fill the void with noise, replacements, or denial. In these cases, silence does not lead to maturity, it leads to distance. And that distance reveals a truth that was always present but hidden beneath communication. It shows that the connection was not rooted in depth, but in convenience or habit. This is where silence becomes a decision maker. It removes the burden of guessing. When someone does not reach back with effort, clarity, or accountability after silence, they are answering a question without speaking. Silence shows whether someone is willing to do the internal work required to sustain a meaningful connection. If they are not, the relationship naturally expires, not because of silence itself, but because silence removed the distractions that kept it alive artificially. Silence also protects you from staying in situations that drain you. When communication continues despite imbalance, people often remain stuck in cycles that slowly erode self-worth. Silence breaks that cycle. It forces the relationship to stand on its own foundation. If the foundation is strong, it holds. If it is weak, it cracks. Either outcome is valuable. Growth strengthens. Goodbye frees. When silence leads to goodbye, it is not failure. It is alignment. It means the connection could not meet the level of emotional responsibility required to continue. Silence ends confusion by replacing hope with reality. It stops the waiting, the overthinking, the emotional limbo. Closure arrives not through explanation, but through acceptance. This acceptance creates space for healing and redirection. Silence also reveals readiness. Some people are not prepared for the depth, consistency, or responsibility that real connection demands. Silence exposes this without confrontation. It shows who is emotionally available and who is not. Words can promise readiness, but silence tests it. If someone disappears into the quiet, they were never prepared to stay when things became real. For the person choosing silence, this stage is transformative. Regardless of the outcome, silence ensures that you do not abandon yourself to preserve connection. It allows you to step back and observe rather than react. You begin to see whether the relationship aligns with your values, your boundaries, and your future. This perspective is impossible when emotions are constantly stirred by communication. Silence also restores balance. Instead of carrying the emotional weight for two people, you release responsibility that was never yours alone. A relationship requires mutual effort. Silence reveals whether that effort exists on both sides. If it does, growth follows. If it does not, release follows. Both are honest outcomes. When silence leads to reconnection, it often does so with clearer expectations. Boundaries become respected. The relationship no longer operates on fear of loss, but on choice. This is maturity. Silence filters out what was reactive and leaves what is intentional. When silence leads to goodbye, it leads to peace over time. The absence of constant emotional turbulence allows the nervous system to settle. Self-trust grows. You begin to move forward without dragging unresolved hope behind you. The ending, though painful at first, becomes a relief because it removes uncertainty. Silence also ensures that whatever happens next is real. There is no forcing, no convincing, no chasing. Growth happens because both people are willing. Goodbye happens because alignment is missing. Either way, silence prevents false continuation. It stops relationships from existing in half, forms that drain energy without offering fulfillment. Silence is honest because it does not negotiate outcomes. It allows reality to unfold naturally. It respects free will. It gives people space to show who they are when nothing is being asked of them. That is why silence is such a powerful determinant. It does not create endings or beginnings. It reveals which one was already forming beneath the surface. In the end, silence is not about waiting. It is about allowing truth to take shape without interference. It is about stepping back far enough to see clearly. Growth or goodbye are not opposites. They are both forms of progress. One builds together, the other releases apart. Silence ensures you do not mistake attachment for connection or fear for love, guiding you toward what is real, sustainable, and aligned, whether that path leads back to each other with maturity or forward alone with clarity and self-respect. So don't be afraid of that quiet moment. Don't rush to fill it with explanations. Don't break your peace just to ease someone else's discomfort. Let the silence do its job. Let it expose. Let it teach. Let it decide. Because when you both go silent, what happens next is not random. It's revelation. And whatever comes after, reconnection or release, you walk away stronger, clearer, and finally aligned with what you deserve. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how silence becomes your power.